Welcome to this meeting of the KRM Functions subproject. Today is February 23rd. My name is Katrina Beery, and I will be your host for this meeting. We have an agenda today, and that is being presented here. And please add your name under attendees with your company that you're representing to all those present. And since I see some faces that I recognize on this call, but that are new to the subproject, I'd like to invite Carlos and Ifan to introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Carlos. I work at Apple. And yeah, I need to mention anything else.
Hi, I'm Ifan. Carlos and I work on the same team. And then we know Katrina because we were all working together before. So good to see you, Katrina.
Good to see you too. Thank you for coming today. So we have a couple topics here today. The first one is a feature request from Carlos. I've had a look at this, and I think Munchie and Natasha also did. So actually, unless Yuan, are you familiar with this as well, or should we give an overview before we dive into discussion? Can you hear me, Yuan?
Yes.
I see everybody else has commented on the issue, so I was wondering if you were familiar with it as well, or if we should go over in detail before we discuss whether to accept it.
It would be great if we can go through the details.
Okay, Carlos, would you like to present about it since you're here?
Sure. So I was playing with the results part of the KRM spec. One of the things that I found is that it has a proposed field and a current value, proposed value and current value. Well, it is not explicitly mentioned. I believe the intention for these two values are so that we could say as a user of the KRM spec, KRM function spec, I may want to build a tool that could do some modifications on my results, but maybe not directly. Maybe this tool could ask the customer or the user, hey, do you want to make these changes? So in the example that I proposed here, I have current values Monday and proposed values Saturday for the weekend. Now there could be two values in this case, Saturday and Sunday. And my question is, how do we present multiple options, essentially? Like out of the whole universe of options, right now, I only have one possible value. And what if I want two? What if I want five? And the way to do it right now, I'm not sure if this is the expected way, but one way of doing it is I could generate multiple result entries, multiple results, where one will say proposed value Saturday, and the other one will say proposed value Sunday. Essentially, I will need to repeat the entire block of the result. And if I had 5 options, I will need to repeat these 5 times. So my proposal here is to add essentially multiple options. So instead of proposed value, it will be proposed values, so plural, and then it'll be multiple fields, multiple entries where each entry is going to be one option. Although this will be a breaking change for the spec because that'll be dropping one of the fields. One of the proposals that I saw in one of the comments is that instead of dropping it, we could just deprecate it and create a new field. The benefit of all of this is if I have 5 options, I don't need to repeat the entire block of result, which is going to be exactly the same content except for the proposed value field. Yeah, so it'll essentially compress everything nicely into a set of options.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that does make sense to not force the consumer to dedupe essentially what errors are actually, what results are actually a single result. The one question that I personally have about the suggestion to introduce it as a second field, deprecate the old one, and then move forward is, since we're not on the server side here, we don't have a way, like we don't have a defaulting stack that we can use to make it seamless for folks consuming these APIs. So you could theoretically end up in a situation where you have one system that implements the specification that emits the old field and a new one that is aware of both. And we have to say what they're supposed to do with that. And if the new one decides, well, I'm going to emit the newer field because that is not deprecated, right? But then it goes back to a second processor that is only aware of the old field, then we have a problem. So I'm not sure, even by supporting both fields, because we lack that defaulting stack component, it is actually compatible between tools implementing the spec. I think it might still be breaking, because it would break compatibility between tools that both are compliant in theory. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. That said, like, I wonder how, is it very expensive to make a V2 given the small number of consumers we have right now that has proposed fields or proposed values plural?
Are there other users? So like you said, there's like very few users currently for KRM spec. I wonder if there have been other users stumbling up on proposed value and who think like, oh, this is fine. So mostly just wondering, do we have enough users to get feedback on whether this will be like a good idea or not?
I personally have not used this. I think the use case that you're describing makes sense and is probably the intended one, but I haven't done it personally, so I can't speak to it. Does Kept or any of the Kept customers use this feature? Munchie or Natasha?
So as far as I know, we are not using this feature a lot in CAP. Yeah. So, and also a question for Carlos. So how are you using this feature in Apples? Do you have the tools to automatically fix the thing, fix the field?
I guess so. If I want to modify a field directly to a known correct value, that's only one value. I know that I can use the filters to make that modification automatically. The tool I'm thinking about is something that will ask the user to choose, do you want to make this change? Is it okay to make this change? And sometimes there could be multiple options for the correct value. I do have a tool, although I cannot speak too much about it, but it's essentially a tool that will ask the user for proposals in case there are multiple changes. One thing that could be similar to the use case is when you're working on, say, VS Code, and if you have a spelling corrector extension, when you click modify, you will get a list of multiple options to choose for the word you want to correct. It's essentially that's the same use case that we want to implement, but for configurations. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if what I'm going to add is give you a little more information, but I think how we're going to use this field, like for example, I don't know, from the other perspective, like when the user or when KRM returns the results with a list of proposed values, we also use it from the other end, not from the analyzer's end, but from the receiver's end. It's mostly just reading it, like putting it into, formatting it into a more readable results for user. So our tool will be able to handle whether it's one proposed value or a list of proposed values.
Okay, got it.
I guess we still have the two options on the table. Like if we think that we have a decent sense of the consumers of this and none of them are actually using this field anyway, then the concern that I raised about incompatibility between them is not a big deal. So we could still go with Munchie's suggestion. Otherwise, if we want to make a V2 of the spec, considering there aren't very many consumers and none of them are using the field anyway, it still wouldn't make a very big difference to anybody to cut that V2, I don't think.
To continue that V2, I wonder, like, if we were going to do that step, should we take a closer look at the rest of the spec to see if there are other changes that may be reasonable to do? Like as an opportunity, because we will be changing from V1 to V2. If not, I think either solution will work for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if we want to cut V2, so ideally we should get more feedback from our users and accumulate more like propose the change and then cut V2. And one question I think we should make it clear is that, so if we cut V2, how long are we going to maintain V1? For example, like the SDK, are we maintain both and for how long?
Yeah. I guess it comes back to the question of what does it mean like to be V1 or V2 of the specification? There are a couple things, like we're talking about field of resource list specifically, so the resource list object would get a V2 version, and as long as like the SDK could probably flip straight to using it, and if you need the old version you can use the old version. What else would it imply? That might be it, essentially. We can for sure review what's in here. The rest of it besides here. Since resource list is otherwise very simple, like it's a function config in the items, which that is what it is. Like I don't think there's any possibility for this to change. The result is the most complex part, and we were just talking about how neither of us actually uses that personally. So if Carlos and Ifan have more feedback on what we could improve in there, then that would be great to bundle in with a V2 update for sure. Or if there's other folks who listen to the recording of this meeting perhaps and are using it and can chime in with their feedback, that'd be great to have.
I actually have a question about with Carl about the use cases he described. So are you planning to provide the users the functions, or you only handle the result on like filtering the result?
So let's say that the users will run a tool that we can that will consume all the resources to collect a bunch of result objects, and the results are meant to be something like linter errors or warnings. So it'll behave kind of like a linter, and the tool, instead of providing the results directly to the user, the tool will provide, say, a set of options for them to choose and to automatically fix it. Or we could just provide the results and then have another tool that will do it, but it wouldn't be the user directly interacting with the result object.
Provide the result, you mean you write the code that instantiates the result object, right?
Yes.
So that proposed value is an interface, which means you can define your own type. It doesn't have to be of the same type as the current value, right?
That is correct per my understanding. Although, if I understand correctly, let's say that I choose to switch from a string to a list of strings. My understanding is that the tool, instead of writing or providing the set of strings, my understanding is that the intention is for this to be a one-to-one replacement. So I will replace a string for an array in the YAML, and that may not be what the user wants. I don't know if that makes sense.
So you provide the tool that to instantiate the result object, and in the current
Yes.
value, the current value is what user provide, and the proposed value is your system's response, suggesting
Yes.
users how to fix that problems. And that result proposed value doesn't have to be of the same type as the current value. And in your tool, you can define a different kind than current value and expose that with a more, more complete message to users.
So if I
That is
understand,
correct.
So
I think
this doesn't have to be of the same type.
if I understood
I agree.
correctly, what Ewan is saying is that we could create a struct that, let's say if we want to return a list of string, we could have a struct that contains the list of string. And then
It can contain different,
give that.
it can contain attributes, and the attributes. So basically, this is customized. You provide the attributes in your custom struct, and the users, they can read that message. Either it's rendered by, it's marshaled by YAML or JSON, or in their client-side tool, they can get details from the proposed value. It doesn't have to be tied with a current value. I think this is, as long as you are the owner of the tool, then you can define whatever kind of struct with whatever kind of message. And if this is like displayed via some print, you can define the string functions for that struct type.
So I think, let me see if I understand correctly. So essentially, because I can define my own types on my own tool, and I also own the tool that will display something based on the results, then are you saying that the spec? Yeah, so if I understand correctly, you're saying the spec doesn't need to change because I can essentially treat the proposed value the way I want. My only concern with that is that my understanding is that the KRM spec needs to be, let's say, generic or global, or I don't know, like I should be able to just pick some tool that's open source or whatever, that off the shelf that will generate results. And I believe that I should be able to use the same. If this tool is generating proposed value, I believe I should be able to do the same treatment for my own tools because it's implementing a common spec. And that will mean that tools will behave differently if I treat this proposed value field specially. Although if that's not a concern, then I guess that's fine. My only concern is that it will break the commonness or globaliness of the spec, because even though it'll be the same spec, tools will take this value differently. And I don't think that's intended.
Do you have a specific case that it may break?
Yeah, so for example, if I have current value in the example that I shared of Monday and Saturday, Sunday, my current value is Monday, and my proposed value, instead of being Sunday, it will be an array that will contain Sunday and Saturday. But then if I were to grab a tool that was implemented open source by someone else implementing the same spec, like, I don't know if it will behave by my same standards or by my same conventions. So even though it'll be the spec.
So you defined, as long as you define the proposed value struct type and the client, they use the same struct type.
Right,
Then,
but I'm saying, like, if I grab another KRM function written by someone else that may not follow this convention, my tool wouldn't be able to handle that, because even though the spec is the same, the convention will not be the same.
Yeah, the spec itself is a convention. It's not a Go thing per se, right? So I agree with Carlos that semantically proposed value means a single value that they're proposing to replace, like that the author of the function is saying you should use exactly this. So if you go beyond that and say, well, I'm going to interpret arrays as actually a list of options instead of as a single array value that the function author wants me to use as is, then that goes beyond the spec and we introduce ambiguity in how to interpret what a result is, which I think is not ideal, because there are use cases for this that are a brownfield validation and where the type correctly wouldn't match, because say it's supposed to be an array, the field's supposed to be an array, and they gave us a single number, and what the result is supposed to be describing is that you shouldn't have int 12, you should have array int 12. That's the desired thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that would be ambiguous, and I think either of Carlos's suggested approaches avoid that ambiguity and be preferable as a result.
I thought they provide both. They both provide the tool and render the message to users, so that's both owned by Carl.
Well,
do you mean users, they may not use the struct they defined?
Well, this is an open specification. We're talking about the specification itself, right? So in theory, yeah, you have somebody who is the provider of the function that is implementing the function that's generating results, and then you have somebody potentially from a completely different context and community and who is processing the list of results from a diversity of different function providers, amalgamating them into a single list where hopefully result means the same thing across all of them because they're all following the spec. You can't depend on having control of the whole pipeline, and because necessarily the specification is intended for you to be able to chain multiple compliant things together that come from different sources.
I see. I thought this is only for Apple's users. So I mean, it may also include open source users custom struct.
Well, it's not struct, right? We're talking about functions as a whole, compliant functions. So Apple's thing, like they're probably, I'm guessing, building lots of internal functions that are being used for this product they're talking about. But also, if they're compliant with the specification, then they should be able to pull in anything. And like that's a matter of principle about the spec, that if you're following this spec, then you should be compatible with all other tools that follow the spec because you share a meaning of what these fields are for and how they're interpreted.
Yeah, the spec is an interface. That proposed value is an interface.
I am showing the Go implementation in the function framework, but where is that? If I go back far enough, I think I already had it open here. The spec itself is this, not the Go implementation that we have in KRM Functions framework. The spec itself is this document, right? So result.
I see.
Result, field, path, current value here. Current value of the field, there's a typo here actually. Proposed value is the proposed value of the field to fix an issue. And it can be anything. Yeah.
Maybe we should rethink a little about how likely it would be in reality for us to have several proposed values. Because if it's just our edge case, maybe it's not worth to do this whole change of conventions. But if this is quite popular in the industry for other companies as well, for KRM function users, then maybe it would make sense. And I do agree with Katrina and Carlos that the convention should not introduce ambiguity. So in the sense that if proposed values, the plural case is used by many occasions, then it would make sense to change it rather than telling user to, just build your own struct.
I thought I had new thoughts to the point about how difficult this would be to maintain in the functions framework itself. And I think it could actually be quite easy because we don't have the struct typed to a particular thing. And we could use unmarshalling as a like defaulting hook. And like when we're unmarshalling it, we could make sure that the fields, marshalling and unmarshalling to make sure that the fields look the same based on the API version that we're given. So it'd be a matter of tracking like, is the object coming in V1 or V2, and interpreting the field appropriately and making sure both struct fields are populated out of that, or not both, probably would internally only have the new one, but we could populate it off of the old one automatically if we hook into marshalling and unmarshalling. Little fancy maybe, but I think it would work. And Ifan, I don't know how popular it is because as far as I know, you're the only ones who are actually using this feature. So that means it's not very popular, but it also means that your experience is the most valuable experience we have as to what is useful here. And we do want to make it more useful. It's easier to change early on when you're the only user, right?
That makes sense. I didn't know we're the only user.
I don't know that for sure either. You're the only one who's come forward.
I wonder, yeah, it's probably too early. I was gonna propose if you have a user base and then we could do like a poll and then ask people about, because it's I think this change is not like a right or wrong change, is more of a opinion based, like we think this might be better kind of change. So it'd be good to talk to the user, but if we don't know many other users, then we're back to ground one. We don't know what to do. Will this change hurt anything else other than maintenance, which you seem to have a solution in mind for the V1 and V2?
I don't think it would. I guess if we could somehow, maybe with a GitHub search, that's obviously not going to turn up anything private, like it wouldn't have turned up your project, but we declared this V1 for the purposes of kept and customized collaborating on it. Neither of those tools actually uses this portion of the spec. We could say, let's be pragmatic and just change it in V1, even though it's V1, because the only consumers, and we're able to validate that to some extent, do not actually care about these fields. So that is strictly speaking an incorrect thing to do. But if we want to be pragmatic and we can determine with reasonable amount of certainty that it's not going to cause anybody any pain, and maintaining a V1 and a V2 and going through the formal process of cutting that just on principle would actually cause us maintenance, then maybe it's worth considering. Munchie, I wonder if you have a strong opinion about that.
So I don't have a strong opinion of that. So in CAP, so if a functions use this field, we will show it up in the eventual result. But for the functions that we build, we are not using this field.
So the kept will output it through if it shows up, but you don't manipulate it, in other words. Like if some other function emits it,
Yeah.
you retain it and print it somewhere, but
Yeah. So if a functions emit this, so cap will like render the result in like a well format output, but it doesn't autocorrect anything using this field. It doesn't do auto corrections.
okay. Would you be able to, as an action item, like validate internally whether or not it would be acceptable to just update v1 in place because nobody's actually using this and that would be by far the path of least resistance, or whether that would be totally unacceptable because something's depending on it, in fact?
Yeah, I can do that internally in Google and verify that.
So normally I'm very like by the books that I would not want to modify something that's been declared v1, but it just I don't want to do it just for the sake of an exercise either, because it would be definitely easiest to just update it and make the improvement for everybody in place. Okay, unless anyone has anything to add, I think Google is the other place that would have the most potential for finding other users, if there are indeed any that this would affect. So I think getting that info from Munchie is the next step.
Sounds good to me.
The other two items are both mine. So if somebody has something else to bring up, I would like to make space for that before I move on to talk about my points. All right, so I just have two keps here that are open. One is one I brought up last meeting, where it was my action item for last meeting to make this PR essentially. And there was one point of discussion, assuming it didn't make progress this morning yet. There's one point of discussion that we didn't talk about at last meeting, which is the change of the name from KRM function to KRM function definition in the type. And the reason I wanted to do that, as I explained here, was to strengthen the analogy to CRD, because what we're defining here, like if you think about it in terms of custom resources, you're not defining a custom resource, you're defining a CRD, which is why making all these changes to the fields themselves makes sense. So I thought it would just help with clarity if we made that analogy really explicit by reflecting it in the name as well. And since nothing depends on this yet, now seemed like the time. So that's why I was proposing that in here as well. I thought it would be worth discussing so we can move this PR forward if that's the only point of contention. And this is, it shows up, it doesn't even really show up in catalog because catalog just has a list of these things. It doesn't actually have the type. So this really shows up in the function registry, I think is probably the main place. The function registry, when you define your function, you define the full type. So it's not even a huge deal, I think, but I don't know. I thought it'd be clearer this way.
Okay, then I think that sounds fine to me. So, and then I think we can move forward with this PR.
Great. The other one is super old, so I just wanted to put it back on your radar. And Jeremy's not able to make it today, but oops, wrong one. I just clicked on the same one I had open. Here we go, this one. This is mainly changes from discussion we had in November, I want to say, super long time ago, with a little bit of an addition. So like this runtime provider stuff, that's what we discussed a super long time ago. there was just one thing that I wanted to draw attention to here, which is how to support, it's basically about path lookup. So this is the only outstanding comment on here. We don't need to go through it right now, but I just wanted to point out that this PR is still outstanding and it has some really basic changes that we discussed a long time ago. So I would like to get that in. And then the last thing is another one that we don't need to discuss right now, unless everybody has already, read through it, because it's really quite a long and detailed issue. But here, I'm actually going to paste this one directly into the chat for ease of access. Somebody asked us about this in our Slack group about 2 weeks ago. And I think it would be great if as a group, we all went through this and added our thoughts either in Slack or on the issue, because it does seem extremely related to our sub-project. The use case that they have is very analogous to not only KRM functions, but also pipelines of KRM functions. So how to chain them together. They have a server-side use case, but it's still fundamentally that same, like how do you combine functions? How do you invoke them? So there's parallels to KEP, there's parallels to customize, and there's potentially even a tie into the alternative execution engines issue that I remember was floating around somewhere on the KEP repo, I believe, a few months ago. So yeah, nothing particular to say because this is very long. Please read the details and get back to this person with your opinions either here or in Slack. All right. So with that, I guess we move on to stand-ups. Functions registry.
Yeah, so I added this item under stand-up just to make it known that we have a GCP project, SIG CLI, owned with me, Katrina, Jeremy, and Megchi as the owners. And I'm planning to make it build our Docker images and stage them before we publish them officially. Yeah, so that exists.
Great. I saw you also had a lot of progress made on the functions repo as well lately, so that was good to see.
Yeah, so we donated the Helm chart function. There's CI that runs end-to-end tests. I made another PR that will run unit tests, and another one that I saw you commented on that fills out all the readmes. So I'm working on those.
Great. What else did we typically have in stand-ups here? It's nothing for catalog or composition today. How about function SDK? I did a lot of code review on that last week, so I don't know if you've had a chance to look yet, or if there's anything else to mention.
Oh, so, thanks for a review. So I haven't got a chance after that to address the comment. So I will try to address the comments in the next few days.
Okay, sounds good. If that's it then I think we can finish up early. Thank you everyone for coming today. It is great to see you all, and hope to see you again in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.